Hey everybody, I'm just going to go over in this lecture very quickly a couple of our key ethical theories for this week. These normative ethical theories. This is from Moreland and Craig, chapters 21 through 22. Now, I'm not going to get into a number of the key arguments for and against these because this is what your discussion is going to be on this week. And I wanted to make sure that you're really digging through the text and you're pulling out those arguments. So your discussion will primarily be interacting with the Moreland and Craig text. Of course, make reference to the Grotius and the Timmins and Shoemaker text. These are great. They have some great arguments. And obviously, if you pull out an argument from Aristotle or from one of our other writers, that's awesome, and I'd like to see that too. But the arguments for and against these are really what your discussion is going to be about. So let's talk first about egoism. Egoism is a normative ethical theory that each person has a moral duty to obey only those moral rules that will be in the agent's maximal self-interest over the long haul. So that if one is an egoist, one ought to do the things which leads to one's own self-interest, which help one to advance one's goals, oneself in the world. So you're primarily responsible as an egoist for yourself. You see this in the philosophy of Ayn Rand. Ayn Rand, an egoist philosopher, who famously said, "I love my husband selfishly." This is egoism. The second normative ethical theory for this week is utilitarianism. Utilitarianism will probably be more familiar to many of us. Utilitarianism is the notion that the rightness or wrongness of an act or moral rule is solely a matter of the non-moral good produced either directly or indirectly in the consequences of that act or rule. So utilitarianism is a kind of consequentialism. It has to do with the bringing about of good consequences and the minimizing of negative consequences. Generally, utilitarianism would say something like, we should maximize satisfaction and minimize dissatisfaction. This is what the utilitarianism of Kai Nielsen, a modern-day philosopher, would suggest. You see this in the philosophy of John Stuart Mill, Jeremy Bentham, in your readings, that the rightness or wrongness is not a matter of an actual moral good, but of non-moral goods, bringing about positive consequences and minimizing negative consequences. So there are two kinds of utilitarianism. Act utilitarianism is the first one. That is that each act that an agent considers should be scrutinized as to how well that act maximizes utility. So there's a principle of utility in utilitarianism. You're going to need to know that from your book. Make sure you know what the principle of utility is. The act utilitarianism means that each act needs to be scrutinized. Rule utilitarianism is a little bit different. Rule utilitarianism would say that a rule is a correct moral rule only if everyone acting on this rule maximizes utility compared to an alternative rule. So acts are right or wrong only if they conform to a rule that we know maximizes utility. That is, that it maximizes satisfaction, minimizes dissatisfaction. That's utilitarianism. The third kind of normative ethical theory is deontology. Deontology has to do with moral duties, that moral rightness or duty is independent of non-moral goods. So moral behavior may have some kinds of positive or negative consequences, but with deontologists, they're not primarily concerned with whether or not non-moral goods are the result of moral acts. Rather, that moral rightness or duty is independent of those things, that some moral acts are right just because they are right, and we're duty bound to behave this way. They should conform to the correct principle of moral duty. You see this in the philosopher Immanuel Kant and his categorical imperative, which you read about this week. You see this, I think, in the Ten Commandments, that there are moral duties that we ought to conform to. There are principles that our acts ought to conform to. And these principles are not primarily concerned with the consequences that result in our conformance or nonconformance. The final theory, normative ethical theory, is virtue ethics. And virtue ethics focuses on what a good person is or how a good person is developed. Virtue ethics is really fascinating. I'm going to post in this week a link to a podcast where the biblical theologian N.T. Wright talks about virtues, and it's a really fascinating idea. It's that becoming a moral person is a matter of practicing certain kinds of behaviors. You see this in the readings from Aristotle from this week, that in terms of living well, attaining to the good life, that there are certain kinds of modes of being that we participate in. There are virtues that we attain to. You see this also in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, where Paul says, "Follow my example as I follow the example of Christ." This is that we should imitate moral exemplars, and we should take on certain kinds of moral virtues, that we should practice these virtues. And so these are the main theories for this week. And what I want you to do for your discussion this week, I think is a really good exercise. You're going to do some philosophical argumentation. You're going to focus on these four theories. And I want you to argue in favor of one normative ethical theory. And in the same post, I want you to argue against another normative ethical theory. So you'll want to see Moreland and Craig, chapters 21 through 22, but of course make reference to the other readings as well. Now, I want to tell you this. When you do this discussion, you should primarily be employing philosophical arguments. Of course, you may find that you agree with one of these ethical positions for theological reasons, and that's great. And if you want to note that, you can, of course. But primarily, what you need to do to be successful in this course is argue philosophically. So you should be primarily considering the arguments in your readings. Though feel free to include a reference if you want to well, I appreciate this moral view because it seems to conform with this scripture, or I think that this moral view is detestable because it seems to deny this scripture. That's fine. You can do that, but really your success in this course is related to how well you can reason philosophically, of course. Anyway, God bless you guys. I hope you have a really great week. Let me know if I can help in any way. Send me an email if you have a confusion about something. I'm happy to help. God bless you.